You wake to the soft clicking before you open your eyes. A small iron language speaking from your waist where you fell asleep, with your girdle still tied. The room is the thin gray that belongs to York just before the birds begin. A color that smells of wet stone and last night's ashes. You do not move yet. The keys move for you, answering the breath you take, nudging one another on the ring like shy neighbors. They rest cool against your woolen kirtle, cool where one tooth presses the skin and says, very little and very cold. The hearth is dark, but it still speaks. A faint soot sweetness, a powder of yesterday's oak, the fat memory of tallow. On the stool by the bed sits a rushlight you pinched out, the bent wick stiff with grease, the rush pith dull as straw. It will go again if you ask it kindly. That is the nature of such lights in this city and century. You taste the room, because this hour is for small taste linen that dried by smoke, damp lime in the wall, the iron's breath like a cold spoon to the lip. Between breaths the iron quiets, then answers again. You think of the belt, of course. A sensible person would have unknotted it before sleep, but yesterday was long, and a draft persuaded you to keep your wool close. The ring rode your hip bone like a small moon, circling whenever you turned. Now it has woken first, and you let it be proud. It is heavy enough to mean something, heavy enough to leave a print on the sheet that will fade by dinner and return by supper. You slide your palm over the keys beneath the blanket and count them by shape rather than number. The house answers you in timbers and joints, in the soft slap of a loose shutter tongue, in the tiny river of air that travels under the door. Somewhere, a mouse gives advice to a crumb. From the rafters comes the dry perfume of stored apples, a sweetness that has nearly forgotten it is fruit. The blanket keeps the damp wool smell that never leaves a northern morning entirely. It has a patience you admire. You lift the blanket an inch, and the keys find the curve of your stomach and object, as if to say, this is my place. You could unbuckle now. You could raise your hips, find the tongue of the buckle, and ask the belt for mercy. Instead, you lie still and consider the etiquette of iron. A key is a promise between absence and entry, you think, and yours are all promise, no entry. They hung on your uncle's girdle first, in another lodging with another storeroom. Then the storeroom changed hands, but the ring did not. Iron keeps its gossip. It followed you, and now you are the steward of a language you never learned to speak. If you were to light the rush now, it would give a small cone of yellow and a ribbon of smoke that smells of kitchen and sheep. Your fingers remember how the holder tilts, how the clip bites, how the flame sighs when the wick catches. This is the ordinary light of such houses, rush pith dipped in tallow, set in an iron stand that leans a little like a man listening, and the little blaze would comb the edges of every tooth and ward with shy gleam. The iron would enjoy being seen. You would enjoy pretending the shine is usefulness. There is the small business of scent, too. Someone once told you to press a clove into the tallow pot to tame the smell, or to keep a sprig of rosemary by the keys so iron would learn manners. You tried the clove and it worked until it didn't. The rosemary served a week and then went into broth. Now the iron smells as iron does, and you decide not to fight it. It belongs to morning as closely as chill belongs to the floorboards, and damp belongs to the stone. You breathe it in, and let it be part of the furniture of dawn. And then there is the debate that you do not join. Whether folk like you wore keys openly at the belt each day, or tucked them into a pouch, or kept them hanging by an inner peg except for errands. Historians still argue whether a visible ring meant clear household stewardship in every yard of the city, or only in some, whether the show of iron was emblem as much as implement. You have settled the matter for yourself with indifference. You wear them when you forget to take them off. You hang them when your hip complains. You tuck them away when you remember not to. You stretch at last, the careful stretch of someone who knows where the tender place begins. The ring slides a finger's width, and the teeth kiss one another. You think about doors you cannot open, and find that the thought has no sharp corners this morning. It is as simple as weather, a closed gate and fog, a locked chest in a room you do not enter. Outside, York rises grain by grain beyond the wall. A bell clears its throat. Linen flaps at a back window. A dog refuses a boy. The city turns over like a slow beast finding a softer side. For now you close your eyes once more and let the morning visit without demanding you open anything at all. The keys rest where you do. The bruise decides not to throb. The rushlight accepts its silence. You are held by common things: wool, wood, ash, iron. The day stands politely in the passage. It can wait while you rehearse the shape of it, while you choose nothing more ambitious than the next quiet breath, while the little ring of your useless companions remembers how to be still. The belt remembers its work before you do. When you roll an inch toward the warm dent in the mattress, the leather thong that carries the ring tugs at your waist, as if calling you back to duty. It has a patient voice, smooth from years of being pulled through the same buckled tongue. You find the bruise by touch, not sight. A small oval tenderness the iron has signed in your skin. It stings the way salt stings an honest scratch. Not angrily, just to make a point. You lift the blanket and the ring slides, teeth clicking, content to prove that gravity also keeps house. You sit and the room shifts its weight, rafters creak, the rush mat gives a cool sigh, and the belt, pleased to be central, draws the keys forward like a little audience. The thong bites at one place where the edge is lipped from years of wear, and you promise, as you always promise, to rub it with fat before bed. Instead, you look at the buckle hole you always choose, the one that widens like a sleepy eye, and you have the old thought that a different hole would change your life. It would not. The keys would only find a new place to complain. You dress in the ordinary layers that hold a northern morning together. Linen first, cool as a stream. Then wool, the good sort that smells faintly of sheep no matter how you scold it. Then the gown that behaves if you ask politely. Over all of it the belt declares itself, a narrow border at your middle that claims both sides, your inside life and the world beyond the door. In houses like these, across 17th century England, keys commonly hang at the belt on a ring, less for grand show than because iron wants a sure place to ride and a sure hand to find it. That is the respectable fact of the thing. Simple as bread, the respectable fact does not cure the pinch. You slide a thumb between leather and linen to make a channel where skin can remember being unbitten. The channel closes when you breathe. You settle the ring so it rests over cloth folds and not bone, a geometry you have learned by trial and unwilling error. The teeth of one long key, the thin one with the gentle ward, always seeks your hip. You turn it outward, and it learns again how to be harmless. The ring itself has learned nothing new in years except this: how to make a low circle bruise with the gravity of a sermon. Someone once advised you to knot a soft scrap between the two longest keys, to keep them from striking one another like quarreling cousins. You do this now, a fold of old wool, trimmed from a sleeve, tied twice so it will not slip. The sound changes from chime to thud, and the bite on your side loses one tooth. Another neighbor swore by a trick even humbler: smear a fingertip of tallow on the inside of the belt where it rubs, then dust it with ash so the fat keeps its manners. You tried it one winter and discovered that ash remembers everything it touches. Today you prefer a clean complaint. You stand, and the ring swings forward to greet your knee. Keys are social by nature. They introduce themselves to furniture. The stool learns your presence by a small scrape, the bedpost by a knock, the door by a kiss it does not return. When you bend for your shoes, the bunch slides toward your ribs and tests their readiness, a teacher with an iron pointer. You imagine the city hearing you assemble yourself, and perhaps it does. York is a keeper of sounds, a market creak, a bell encouragement, a river hush, and your particular clatter simply makes a neat small line within the day's long song. You comb your hair with fingers, and the belt slides to a lazier place. You pull it true again, snug but not unkind, and knot the extra thong so it will not dangle and tickle your patience. The knot is not handsome, and you forgive it. Handsome knots are for feast days and ribbon. This is for the daily friction of wood, wool, and iron. You put on your apron and pass the belt under it, not over, so the keys peep out like shy birds instead of strutting like cocks. Modesty improves nothing practical, but it quiets the noise of being seen. There is a little smell you can name now that you are upright: cold iron wrapped in yesterday's tallow, a faint sheep note from the apron, a whisper of damp lime from the wall. If you rub the ring with the heel of your hand, it warms and gives back a scent like candle smoke that has mislaid its flame. You do rub it, and the bruise under the belt considers softening. You promise again to tend the leather. You promise many things to small objects in the morning. They keep your promises better than you do. You move to the chest and lift the lid by habit, though there is nothing in there that needs keys, nothing that trusts you to open it or begs you to try. The ring obeys the motion and taps the wood, as if reminding it of old packs. The chest does not answer. In this house, as in many, the locks that rule you are elsewhere. Shutters with bars, a shared gate that minds itself, the great doors you pass in the street that belong to other people's concerns. The irony is gentle and daily. The iron is neither. Of course, there are learned people who make a study of such things: belts, rings, the theater of keeping. Historians still argue whether a visible bunch of household keys in towns like York marked the mistress of a house as a quiet officer of stores and linen throughout the 17th century, or whether men kept them more often than we imagine, or whether servants bore them openly while their betters preferred hooks and pegs indoors. The evidence speaks in documents and pictures, in wills that bequeath a great key, and prints that fancy a busy household. You let the scholars quarrel. Your hip is convinced by simpler proofs. While the clever talk, you compose your morning treaty with the belt. You shift the buckle one finger's width, then think better and return it to the sleepy hole. You pad the worst tooth with the fold of wool again and press it hard so the habit will take. You turn the ring so its joint faces outward, where it can scratch furniture instead of flesh. You lift your apron tie just a nail's breadth higher, so the iron hangs from cloth rather than bone. None of it is much. Together it is enough. Daily life is built from enoughs. At last you straighten, and the belt pulls once, like a child remembering to hold a hand at the step. You answer with a small pat and a promise you might actually keep. When you come home, you will hang the ring on the nail and give your waist a night off. The promise feels almost luxurious, for now the iron comes with you, a quiet authority that opens no doors and still pretends to matter. You accept its company the way you accept the day's weather there, unavoidable, faintly comic if you tilt your head. You walk to the threshold. The belt sits where it should. The bruise minds its manners, and the keys pleased to be included begin their soft applause. You pause at the threshold the way you do every morning, not for prayer, not for weather, but for inventory. The ring waits in your palm like a small captured wheel, and you turn it slowly so each bow shows its face. There is the plain round bow, smooth from years of being asked the same question. There is the oval with the little nick that looks like a bite. There is the one with a square bow that always pretends to be grander than it is. The bits and wards jut like teeth and tongues, iron grammar that promises to speak to a lock somewhere that is never here. You test each one with your thumb, and they confess the same story. They were made for other mouths. The light that guides this ritual is not generous, only a spill of pale from the high window and the polite attention of the rushlight. You lift the long, thin key with the modest bit, hold it to the wick, and watch the metal receive the color the flame offers, bruised gold on black. The iron keeps its chill even when it glows a little, and you like it for that stubbornness. Your palm smells of tallow again, and the ring leaves a faint crescent on your skin, as it always does. A moon that rises in the same place each day and sets by dinner time. You smile without meaning to. The keys dislike being chosen. They prefer being taken whole. In this time and country, most household locks are warded affairs, iron wards, inside a box that let only the right shapes pass, and the keys that serve them are simple, flat-bodied, and strong enough for daily discouragements, but not for miracles. That is the respectable fact you have learned by living. Doors and chests keep honest people honest, and the iron you carry offers ceremony more than sorcery. You accept the thought without bitterness. The day needs ceremony in small doses to stand upright. You sort again, this time by memory. The long one came from your uncle's storeroom and has never met you halfway. The fat one with the square bow first hung on a neighbor's nail, before he decided that nailing it there was all the security he needed. The slender bit that looks like a delicate fish remembered one cupboard briefly in a different house, a cupboard that now is surely a different color and a different argument. You turn each until the wards make a crown in your hand. None of them belong to a lock you will meet before supper, but you take them together because not taking them feels like walking out without your left shoe. Someone once told you to invest in a smaller ring, to choose two keys that lie best against your hip, and leave the rest at home like sulking cousins. You tried it on a brave afternoon. The two you chose behaved like saints, until the first time you needed neither of them, which was immediately. The little ring clicked with a scolding sound that sent you back to the big ring before the week had finished. Another friend swore by the trick of tying a red thread to the principal key, so it could be found quickly while the others sat in their heavy silence. You tied the thread. It dulled, it greased, it collected every crumb the city made, and it never once led you to a door that wanted you. There is a superstition you do not entirely despise. Slip a sprig of lavender into the linen that wraps the ring, and the smell will convince iron to behave, or at least convince your temper to do so. You have tried it, and it is pleasant to be fooled. Some evenings you rub the bow of each key with the faintest trace of oil, and tell them they are dignitaries on a visit. Some mornings you let them sit without polish or favor, and call them what they are: stubborn tools in search of an appointment. The keys do not care either way. They will clack and bruise and announce you with the same loyalty. Locksmiths in this city have windows like sermons, hooks hung with samples, small chests that open if you buy the trick, padlocks that close on 2 fingers to prove a point. You have stood there more than once, comparing the teeth in your hand to the teeth in his display, feeling a quiet hunger to make a match. Historians still argue whether most household keys in provincial towns were truly bespoke to one lock, each filed by a cautious hand to fit a particular ward, or whether patterns repeated so often that neighbors could share shapes without meaning to, borrowing security from habit more than from craft. The paper leaves their question open. The street leaves your hand full of guesses. You try the old game anyway. You hold one key to the doorpost as if the wood itself might remember a lock long gone. You press the bit into a crack in the lintel and decide the size is wrong for any domestic latch you know. You let the ring dangle from your forefinger and listen to the differing voices as they tap one another. A thin chime from the light one, a gruffer note from the fat one, an impatient clack from the square bow. Iron keeps time badly. It is always a little ahead or a little behind. Still, you feel better for having heard them. On the chest by the window sits a scrap of parchment where, last winter, you drew the outline of each key in a moment of fierce organization. The tracings look like a little bestiary beaks and snouts and combs, and you had planned to label them pantry, gate, press, storeroom, though none of those words are true any longer. You never wrote the names. The blank spaces now are more accurate than anything you could have written. Old promise, former use, courtesy weight. You fold the parchment once and tuck it deeper. Paper remembers your ambitions too clearly. You test how each key lies against your hip, the way a tailor tests cloth. The long one insists on pointing inward like a shy finger. You turn it outward and it pretends to learn. The square-bowed show-off lodges where the belt meets bone. You lift the belt and command it to rest on apron instead. The little fish key seems determined to fall between 2 teeth of its neighbors and catch there every time you breathe. You pad that place with the now faded scrap of sleeve, and the ring accepts your negotiation with a dignified muffle. The day grows more possible by these small treaties. You step back from the door and try the weight in motion, a rehearsal before the performance of walking the city. The ring tests the bench, asks the stool a question, kisses the door frame lightly, and declares itself ready. You think once, in a small rebellious corner of yourself, about leaving the whole bale on the nail and going out with empty hands and honest pockets. You do not. The emptiness would clatter louder than the iron. There is the larger ceremony now, the one you have taught yourself. You lay the ring in your palm like a coin purse, consult the useless parliament, and then decide with all the gravity of the house itself to take them all. It is not a brave decision or a foolish one. It is simply how the day wishes to sound when you move through it. You slide the ring back onto the thong, let the bow nearest your fingers settle like a roosting bird, pull the belt one polite notch, and let the weight find its place. The keys agree to accompany you without opening anything in particular. You promise to treat them kindly anyway. At the threshold again, you put your hand to the latch you do own, the simple wooden bar that ignores your iron completely. It lifts, as it always lifts, by the courtesy of your hand, and not by the cleverness of any tooth. Outside, the lane is damp and undecided, the morning hanging its wash of gray between houses. You step into it with your retinue of unhelpful metal, and feel, perversely, more ready than if you were free. Ceremony has done its work. You carry the keys that do not open doors, and they carry your day's small dignity in return. You kindle the morning the way you always do, by coaxing a small sun from grease and patience. The rushlight waits in its iron jaws, the rush pith dull and pale, the tallow sheen gone cloudy with sleep. You tilt the holder so the clip looks like a beak ready to peck. Lift the lid of the tinderbox, and listen to the little world inside char, flint, and steel muttering under their breath. One strike, then another. A third finds a temper in the cloth and gives you a sullen red the size of a lentil. You show it the rush. The rush pretends to be shy, then takes the ember and turns it into a yellow that thinks too highly of itself. You lower the lid on the tinderbox, and the room learns where to look. The light is small, but it has opinions. It throws a thin blade across the table where yesterday's bowl waits to be rinsed, and reveals a smear you missed at supper. It lays a friendly thumb on the coarse linen laid over the chair, waking the smell that lives in all good linen soap long gone, smoke never leaving, the ghost of the last wet day. When you cup your hands near the flame, the cold leaves your fingers politely, one joint at a time. The keys warm more slowly. Iron is slow to admit comfort. It prefers to keep its grievances. The wick sizzles once, then corrects itself. You pinch the char with wetted fingers, turn the rush a finger's breadth lower in the clip, and the flame steadies to a modest cone that will neither smoke the rafters black nor drown itself in its own fat. Most households in 17th century England keep this kind of light rush pith peeled and dried, dipped in common tallow, set in a clamp because it is cheap, obedient enough, and made from things a day already understand. That is the respectable fact you live by when mornings begin. Beeswax glows in churches and the houses of the well-provided. Tallow does the rest of the country's thinking. The respectable fact is not sweet in the smell. Tallow belongs to kitchens and hands. It gives a candle the manners of a frying pan. You breathe it anyway, mixed with damp lime from the wall and the iron breath of your keys. Someone once told you to rub the clip's teeth with a clove to teach the flame not to sulk. You tried it, and the house smelled like a feast with no meat. Another time, you slid a sprig of thyme into the tallow pot and learned that thyme is happier on a stew. You keep the light plain now and let your nose be the curious one. You take the pin from its place in the holder's stem and scrape the wick where it mushrooms. A little surgery the flame accepts without fuss. The keys approve nothing. They hang at your belt and present their cold to the new day, like a grievance handed in at the door. You turn your side toward the heat, letting the ring catch a small share, and you hear the faintest tick as hot meets cold somewhere in a tooth. You tell the iron to behave. The iron listens the way. A cat listens politely, without consent. You open the shutter a hand's breadth and invite a sliver of York into the room, air with a river in it, a bell somewhere trying out a note, the soft leather sound of a cart deciding how to roll. The rushlight keeps its authority even with day at its shoulder. It writes bright along the bow of the square key and gives a mild glow to the nicked oval bow, turning both into small saints in a poor altarpiece. You consider polishing them with bread heel, as an old aunt used to do for spoons, and decline. Bread is for hunger. Keys are for noise. Your tinderbox looks pleased with itself, and you reward it by setting the flint and steel neatly, char-folded like a secret. A fringe of brown fungus amadou, cut from a tree, and beaten patient sits in the corner, dry and eager to be spark food. The box closes on its world. Near the hearth, last night's coal sleeps under a coverlet of ash, banked the way everyone does when wood is dear and mornings come cold. You could wake that ember instead of flirting with flint and steel. Today, you keep the ember for the kettle later, a thrift that feels like piety. A superstition belongs to this hour, more than to any other. Scratch a tiny cross on the rush with the pin before you light it, so the flame won't gutter when you turn your back. You have watched neighbors do it with great confidence. You sometimes make a mark without the cross, a shy notch that has no theology, only the comfort of habit. It may help. It certainly pleases the hand. The house seems calmer when the rush knows you have noticed it. There are clever people who read accounts and prints as if they were confessionals. Historians still argue whether households in cities like York leaned more on rushlights than on simple tallow dips throughout the century. Since inventories name lights and candles without blushing to say which, and pictures show what artists like, rather than what kitchens do, you leave the dispute to their good tables, and lay your claim on what your fingers know. Rush for early, dip for later, window for what the sky gives free. The keys ask for another kindness, and you grant it. You draw a square of rag from the peg, fold it double, and cradle the ring where it bruises. The cloth drinks some cold and gives back a damp wool warmth that moves from tolerable to companionable. The flame watches, approving your treaty. You rub a little tallow along the thong where it frets against the buckle, and then wipe it back off again, remembering how ash will turn it into paste the moment you step outside. The morning can find other ways to be gentle. You measure time in the language of this light. When the rush burns down to the clip, you will be dressed to the apron. When the stub gutters and dies, you will have rinsed the bowl, stretched the linen straight, and woken the ember. For now you stand still and warm the back of one hand and then the other. The ring warming last, the iron reluctant and then cooperative. The flame accepts your silence and steadies, as if it has decided you deserve calm. You look around with the authority of the newly lit. The table is a citizen again, not a shadow. The chest is an object again, not a rumor. The chair returns from being a lump to being a perch. The keys, in the presence of this small son, become only what they are. Cut iron on a ring, companions that open nothing, and announce you anyway. You let the sight rest in your chest, like a spoon of broth, thin, honest, enough. If you were a more diligent person, you would trim the rushes this afternoon and set fresh ones to dry on the warm ledge near the chimney. If you were a less diligent person, you would steal another flame from the neighbor each day and let tinder forget your name. Instead, you choose the middle, the place where most lives do their tidy work. You will trim two, dry one, share one when asked, and keep your box clean. Nothing heroic, nothing shameful. The rushlight approves by burning exactly as it should, which is the best praise a morning can offer. The flame has a final kindness. It takes the cold smell of iron and turns it into something almost wooden, as if the keys had slept in a drawer of spice and old boards. You know this is nonsense. You accept it anyway. You blow once, gently, to test how obedient the cone has become. It leans, recovers, and believes in itself. You believe in it too, just enough to begin the rest of the day, without asking any door for permission. Wool greets iron the way hedges greet a cartwheel by catching, holding, and pretending it is an accident. You bend to smooth your gown, and the ring swings down with innocent ambition. One long tooth finds a loose hair in the cloth and draws it out into a tiny loop, as neat as a question. You pinch the loop flat with your nail, and tell yourself you will mend it after supper. You will not. The day will smooth the loop with the general hand of use, and the hem will keep the story until washing day. You try again, more carefully, guiding the ring with your palm as if taming a skittish foal. Iron is brave when cloth is generous. It nuzzles at the woolen weft and comes away with nothing but a whisper of fibers the color of rain. The gown itself has the durable softness that fulling gives wool pounded and rinsed until it is close and kind to the wind. You like the weight of it, the sober drape that makes a person feel honest. The keys like it less. They are teeth by nature. A calm nap looks to them like something to test. The laces at your side behave better. You draw them in, one hand pulling, the other hand offering, and the bodice settles with a sigh. Linen shift, wool gown, apron to come. You put on a small world that knows its work. In 17th century England, everyday dress for ordinary folk lives by this rule of layers linen nearest the skin for clean comfort, wool above for warmth and wear, all of it fastened with a common grammar of ties, pins, and the occasional hook and eye. That is the respectable fact you move through like air. Simple cloth, simple closures, long patience. Respectable facts do not negotiate with snagging. The ring catches the edge of your kirtle when you turn, and a thread lifts like a hair standing in a draft. You pinch it back with the calm of someone who has pinched many such things. There is a needle tucked into the pin cloth you keep on the peg, a small felt square where your bright little hoard sleeps. You could fetch it now, pull through 3 clever stitches, and end the loop's career. Instead, you smooth, pat, and persuade the thread to remember where it lives. The gown pretends to obey. The key looks pleased with itself. Someone once told you to wax your laces with a touch of beeswax, so they slide like a well-behaved fish and never tangle. You tried it, and it helped, and now the laces shine a little when the light is in the mood. Another neighbor swears by the trick of pinning a tiny linen guard at the hem, where the keys bite an invisible square, stitched under, that takes the wear and keeps the gown from learning bad habits. You stitched such a guard in a thriftful mood last Michaelmas. The keys promptly found the place next to it and began their new lesson there. Iron prefers the unsupervised spot. You drop your sleeves by a hand's breadth so the ring won't gnaw at the cuff. Then tie on the apron, passing the belt under rather than over, so the iron will rub colored cloth instead of bone. The apron is a friend to bruise and spill. Its tape lies flat against your waist, and the bow sits a little off-center like a modest feather. When you lift the keys to settle them between apron and gown, the ring snags a thread again and pulls with a sighing patience as if it had been planning this for days. You free the thread and tell the ring, not for the first time, that it is not a tailor. In York's light, which is the color of slate when it thinks kindly of you, the wool looks more dignified than it feels. The nap holds the day's damp as if it enjoyed the company. You remember being told as a child to smooth wool always in one direction, with the lay, never against, unless you wanted to raise every hair like a field teased by wind. Your hand obeys now without thinking. The keys, on their small iron circle, turn lazily as you smooth, testing the hem as though it might open like a secret drawer. You imagine the ring wearing a feathered cap and calling itself master of cloth. You decline to applaud. A sensible fix waits in the chest. A strip of leather that could be stitched to the hem inside. A quiet armor where the ring grazes most. You would need an hour, good light, strong linen thread, run through beeswax, and the small discipline of backstitch. Your hand knows the way. Your day pretends not to. You tuck the thought away like a letter, and promise the gown a kinder future. The gown nods, which is to say it droops in a dignified manner, and forgives you. Meanwhile, the pins have their say. You fasten your neckerchief with two, and consider adding a third. Then relent. Pins are small sovereignty. You keep them bright, because they travel between skin and cloth, and you keep them safe, because they have a way of escaping into floors and finding bare feet at night. A quirky habit belongs to your house because it works. You twist the sewing thread over a pinch of beeswax, as your mother did, letting the wax tame its will. Thread passes through eye passes through cloth, and the world behaves for a moment. The keys observe none of this order. They dangle like politely bored guests who will at any moment rearrange the furniture. Not every scholar sees this daily theater as you do. Historians still argue whether townswomen in places like York laced their gowns more often at the front or at the side through this century, since portraits court vanity, not carpentry, and surviving garments often come from elsewhere. They quarrel over whether most clothes in middling households were cut new by tailors or recut again and again at home until they were more patch than garment. Inventories are loyal to the names of things, not to their histories. You let the argument pass you by like a cart in a hurry, and you live with what fits. The belt tightens a fraction as you draw breath, and the ring tests the hem one more time, then thinks better of it. You reward good behavior with a small adjustment, turning the join of the ring outward so the smooth side lies against the cloth. It helps. The square-bowed key, your vain friend, still noses at the fold near your hip. You tuck a scrap of soft wool between it and its neighbor, and the conversation quiets to a respectful murmur. Iron accepts comfort the way cats accept apology. Eventually, and without admitting you were right, you take 3 steps to see if the treaty will hold. The keys swing, the hem whispers, the sleeve shifts, and nothing snags. You allow yourself the luxury of forgetting the earlier loop. The room returns your favor by smelling today like itself, damp lime, tallow thinking of breakfast, a faint hint of last night's ash, the sweet stale comfort of wool that has lived. You lift your arms to tie your hair, and the ring climbs your side and rests there, shy for a breath, as if it too likes the view from higher up. You lower your arms, and it slides back down, imitating the polite descent of a guest who knows when to sit. The small tear you promised to mend is already planning its future, as a story you will point to with a finger and call nothing. You are not wrong. Clothes bear quiet witness. That is what they do. The hem will see streets and stools and doorstep weather, and come to think of this morning as one small complaint in a long, agreeable list. The keys, for their part, have remembered that they are companions rather than carpenters. You smooth the wool once more with a palm the temperature of calm, and ask the day if it is ready to proceed without further theatrical gestures from iron. The day is willing, the gown is patient, and the ring snug, heavy, undecided, agrees to travel with fewer artistic contributions to your hem. Breakfast teaches the keys their manners, and they learn them badly. You set the wooden bowl on the table, and the ring tugs forward as if iron could be hungry. Each time you lift the spoon, the keys lean and kiss the rim with a small, reproving tap, the kind of noise that says, "This is not a cupboard, and yet we are here." You try moving the bowl farther from your belt. Iron follows like a dutiful hound. You try tucking the ring under your apron. Iron remembers how to wriggle. In the end, you accept the music, a steady punctuation between spoonfuls, as regular as breathing taught to wood. The porridge itself is honest, a soft landscape the color of morning weather. Oats, water, a pinch of salt. It is more comfort than surprise. Steam wavers up with a trustworthy smell, a little grassy from the oats, a little smoky from the hearth. You stir once more with the back of the spoon to be sure the heat is even. Then let the spoon rest in your hand like a warm bird. A heel of yesterday's loaf waits beside the bowl, not proud enough to be called a trencher, but willing to serve as a gentle mop when the bowl goes thin. A cup of small ale stands nearby, brown and mild, prepared to be helpful without boasting. In 17th century England, a breakfast of oat porridge with small ale in modest households is ordinary enough to be invisible. That is the respectable fact you eat with. The respectable fact does not prevent your keys from offering commentary. They find the bowl again and make their little tap, light as a knock one room away. You shift your hip a degree, and their tone changes by half a note, as if the bowl were a small drum and you a reluctant drummer. You could take the ring off just for this meal. You do not. It would be like asking weather to wait in the passage while you chew. Instead, you feed yourself at a human pace and let the iron present its opinion. You break a corner from the bread and hold it over the steam until it thinks better of being yesterday. The crust softens, the crumb learns a gloss, and you use it to fence the porridge into manageable fields. Some mornings you sweeten the bowl with a spoon of ale or a scrape of dripping, a luxury so small it barely counts as boasting. Today you choose plainness and feel virtuous in a quiet, unadvertised way. The wooden spoon knows the drill. It slides left, makes a curve, carries its cargo to your mouth, returns without complaint. The lip of the bowl shows the faint cut lines left by older spoons, a family of crescents that prove other mornings have arrived and gone without asking anyone's permission. Your bowl is treen simple carved wood that has known hands longer than it has known you. You like the way wood behaves under heat. It warms without scorching. It keeps a small world to itself. It forgives clumsy cleaning. A quirk belongs to houses like yours. Spoons and bowls sometimes keep their own marks, a nick or a carved line so each person knows which is theirs. People call porridge and similar dishes spoon meat, and the name is as homely as a folded nap. You run your thumb along the familiar nick and think how much of life's order depends on little agreements like this. A mark on a spoon, a place on a peg, a ring on a belt. The ale is patient. You drink a mouthful, and the chill of the morning unknots a degree. Small ale belongs to breakfast the way steam belongs to porridge. It is more bread you can drink than anything you would call bold. You set the cup down, and the keys acknowledge the movement by touching the bowl again. Lighter this time, almost approving. You smile into the steam. If you sat very still, you suppose, you could outwit them. You are not that sort of person. You prefer to let the clatter be your companion and eat at ease. Near the hearth, the rushlight you kindled earlier has burned to a sensible length, and now minds its business without show. The glow it gives the bowl is not gold so much as straw-colored, a light that flatters wood and forgives Tallow's habits. You are not alone in this hour. The street beyond the shutter keeps time for you with low cartwheels and a voice or two, the language of people preparing to sell ordinary things. Somewhere a neighbor's latch tries a thought. The porridge is at that perfect middle where steam is honest, heat is friendly, and the wooden spoon chooses to be a good citizen. There is prestige in some households for a generous knob of butter, melting a bright pond into the porridge, or for a shake of spice kept for feast days, when the purse pretends to be more important than the fire. You think of those rare mornings with fondness, and then admire today's simplicity doubly for being itself. A curious note belongs to this city. Some people swear by crumbling a crumb of cheese into the last spoonful, calling it a finish fit for a workday saint. You have tried it. The result is warm, sheepish, and content. Today you keep the cheese for noon and let the oats be exactly what they are. A practical thought peeks in while you chew. You could wedge the ring between apron and belt just so, letting cloth hold iron as a mother holds a sleepy child. You do so. The next spoonful meets no interruption, and you wonder if you have discovered a secret that other people will praise you for. Then the cloth gives a little sigh. The ring remembers gravity, and the keys find the rim again tap. You laugh in your throat and admire the iron for keeping its identity. Loyalty is a virtue even when it is exasperating. Not everyone in this place eats this early, even when the light suggests obedience. Historians still argue whether breakfast was a regular, named meal for most townsfolk in this century, or a casual bite stolen before work, with the first serious food taken at mid-morning. Books remember households differently. People remembered only when asked. You count yourself among those who like the quiet of a warm bowl before the day's errands learn your name. Whether you call it breakfast or simply something, it steadies the hand. Your spoon scrapes the curve where bowl meets bottom, a sound like a mouse considering a song. You see the first thin place in the porridge where wood begins to show through, and you steer spoon and bread so no good bit is abandoned to the sides. You leave the very last smear on purpose as a gift to appetite, a little kindness that tells the belly it was not greedy. A splash of ale persuades the last stubborn oats to come away, and the bowl is clean to the eye, ready to be rinsed when you grant water the dignity of your attention. The keys have one last opinion as you stand. They knock the rim with enough confidence to say, "We were here the whole time," and then they settle against your apron as if the business of porridge were now their achievement. You wipe the spoon, lay it on the folded cloth by the hearth, your own mark facing up, and rest your hand for a breath on the ring. It has grown warmer, almost companionable, and it smells faintly of smoke now instead of cold iron. You consider this small success and declare the meal complete. The bowl's steam dwindles to a memory. The rushlight shortens to a promise. The ale retreats to a dark shine. You feel the day gather itself kindly, as though a quiet agreement has been signed between you and its hours. You have fed yourself and your iron both, one with oats, the other with attention. The keys will follow you, tapping their remarks into wood and air. You will let them. Breakfast is accomplished. Usefulness remains undecided. Between the two, the morning has found its level. You step onto Stonegate, and the city greets your iron before it greets your face. The ring at your belt gives a conversational clink that walks ahead of you, strikes the nearest shutter, and returns as a whisper, as if the street were practicing your name. The cobbles are damp and attentive. They keep last night's rain in small, well-behaved puddles, and offer them to your shoes without insistence. Your breath comes back with the smell of wet stone, resting ash, and a faint sweetness from someone's crust cooling in a back room. The keys approve of this audience, and perform their part. Tap when you plant the heel. Tap when you change your mind mid-step. Tap when you pause to notice a sound that was always there. Stonegate is narrow enough to persuade people to share their air. The jettied timbers lean in from both sides like neighbors who never learned to whisper, and signboards hang with animal patience gilded suns, painted gloves, a cup, a bird that teach the wind how to speak politely. When you walk here, the buildings listen. Your iron rewards such attentiveness with commentary of its own, a quiet clatter to say you have arrived, a quieter one to say you are still not especially important. A shutter opens with a wooden breath, and a hand arrives with a broom. Sand whispers over a shop floor, turning yesterday's crumbs into today's neatness. The ring at your belt taps the doorpost and the broom pauses, guessing the size of your arrival before it guesses your face. A cat blinks from a sill and decides you are harmless, or at least entertainments will follow you. You accept the judgment without debate. The street's name keeps a plain truth. In this city, in this century, Stonegate is the old way toward the Minster, a trade street, a show street, paved earlier than most, and worn smooth by usual feet. That is the respectable fact you can feel in the curve of the stones and the orderly way shutters learn to open in sequence. Shops here wake with the same slow grammar each morning: bar up, bar down, board out, broom across. And the cobbles remember every lesson. Respectable facts. Travel with smaller companions. A quirky habit belongs to this stretch. Some shopkeepers hang a sprig of sweet herb rosemary if the garden cooperates. Lavender if it has been kind just inside the doorway at first light, to persuade the air to behave and customers to do likewise. Passers-by sometimes brush it with 2 fingers, pretending to steady themselves on the jam. You do the same when no one watches. The ring notices nothing. It prefers to announce your ankle to the next patch of stones. A cart chooses its path with deliberate grace, and the horse answers your iron with its own measured ring. Between wheel, shoe, and key, the street becomes a mannerly orchestra of metal, each part modest, each part certain of its role. You step over the shallow gutter and feel a cold lick against your shoe's edge. The keys, loyal to their calling, give the cartwheel a ceremonial tap, as if to ask whether it opens anything. The wheel declines to reply. A printer sweeps his threshold, lifting a gray little cloud that changes the smell of morning to dust and ink. He glances at your ring and nods the nod that honors an emblem without troubling to test it. He keeps keys of his own local tidy, designed for cupboards that mine paper and type. Yours look like a traveling sermon by comparison, while saying nothing at all. You return the nod with the gravity of someone escorted by unhelpful heralds. Farther along, a goldsmith's sign pretends not to sway. Behind it, the first file of the day finds a note, and bright metal tidies the breath of the street. The keys do not envy it. Iron knows where it stands next to gilding. A glazier's doorway shows a narrow stack of new panes, greenish as quiet water, and you catch your reflection, looking as if it had woken before you did. Your ring supplies its customary remark. Your face chooses not to argue. You stop where a ribbon of sun has threaded itself between the leaning houses and laid a bright line on the stones. People adjust themselves to that ribbon, faces turning for warmth, shutters opening a nail's breadth more, as if light were a guest to be given the best seat. Your keys catch their share and look, for a courteous moment, like good silver. The pretense amuses you. At the next cloud, they will return to themselves and be perfectly satisfied with the arrangement. Behind you, a latch tries a thought. Ahead, a boy crosses with a covered pot, and the breath of new bread suggests that the day is nearly ready to declare itself. You pause, uninvited, to consider this comfort. The ring answers the pause with a small reminder against your hip. Notice is free. Standing in the way costs a little. You move again, and the clink settles into your stride, as if it had been waiting to be asked. People say the name Stonegate holds a second story. Some insist it honors the paved surface itself, earlier and firmer than its neighbors, a stone way among muddier cousins. Others tell that stone for the great Minster once came along this route, fetched from the river and shouldered street by street toward God's house. Historians still argue whether the name remembers the stones underfoot or the stones carried upon it. The records are helpful to clerks more than to walkers, and leave you to keep both stories comfortably in your head. You test your pace against your sound. Faster, and the keys chatter. Slower, and they comment. You choose the middle speed that suits both bones and street, a modest tempo that lets each doorway hear you before it sees you. This is the luxury of morning without appointment. Nothing expects you, and yet the city makes room as though you were expected. At a window, a woman shakes a folded cloth. Dust becomes air for a breath before it remembers it is floor. She notices your ring and gives the smile reserved for familiar burdens. She likely keeps a smaller companion on a peg under a shawl, one that opens a coffer when the season decides to be careful. You think for a moment of all the keys in the city that do their work humbly, and of your ring that does its work loudly, without finding a single lock to love. The thought arrives, bows, and walks on. You rest a hand on the iron to hush it, while you read a painted board letters inviting you to admire a thing you cannot afford. The ring lowers its voice to a murmur fit for church. You thank it without words. You forget your hand. The next step frees the clink again like a bird escaping your palm. It is almost companionable now. A choosing sound that chooses you. A baker's boy laughs at nothing you can see. A porter shoulders a bundle and makes the whole street tilt for the space of 3 steps. A pair of doves perform the delicate arithmetic of coping with people. All the while your iron keeps its soft syllables, neither apology nor boast, merely the declaration that you are the sort of person who is accompanied. You reach the little widening where the street hesitates before thinking of the minster. Far bells try one note and then another, still deciding what the day requires. The ring at your belt offers its answer without waiting for the vote. The city has heard you before it has properly seen you. And in a place like this, being heard is almost the same as being welcomed. You keep your pace, keep your breath low and steady, and let the clink be your walking staff. Stonegate minds itself, you mind your iron. The two of you, street and ring, agree to go on together, opening nothing at all and doing it very well. You turn down toward the Shambles, and your iron, loyal to mischief, volunteers to collect the day's first souvenir. The lane narrows itself a little more with each step, the timbered fronts leaning so generously that neighbors could pass a loaf across the air without troubling the ground. Rails hang under jutting eaves like tidy ribs, quiet at this hour, remembering yesterday's weight. The cobbles, bowed into a shallow spine, keep the central runnel they were taught long ago, a narrow lesson in where water ought to mind its way. You breathe the shy prelude that belongs to early Market Street's cool timber, a hint of salt, a damp stone patience that has watched many mornings make themselves useful. You practice the art of looking without staring. A shutter lifts. A man with sleeves tied short sets his block to rights, rubbing salt into the scarred wood with a motion that looks both penitent and proud. His awning unrolls like a sober flag, giving the morning a patch of shade, as if to protect it from its own curiosity. Your keys, never slow to make acquaintances, swing forward and test a hanging rail with a small, ringing kiss. When they fall back, one tooth keeps a private gloss, as if it had learned a secret it does not intend to share. In York and other English towns like it, the Shambles is the butcher's quarter, a place of hooks, blocks, and rules that try to keep meat honest. That is the respectable fact. A trade street set to its trade, with raised footings for customers to walk clean, a central gutter to carry washings away, and stalls licensed by men who swear to keep knives sharp and scales fair. You feel the fact under your feet in the way the stones lean toward the runnel, eager to mind their obligations even when no one is watching. The respectable fact brings its familiar companion. Greece is a diplomat with no respect for borders. It goes where shine invites it. A sliver of it finds the teeth of your longest key as if drawn by oath, and there it keeps its counsel with the patience of saints. You wipe the tooth with the corner of your apron. The gloss smiles and refuses to change allegiance. Your iron has made a friend, and you doubt it will be the last. A boy brings a pail and sand, and the block learns today's manners. Sand whispers across wood, taking with it a short history of drips and decisions. He tosses the sweepings into the channel with a wrist used to the distance. Your ring, out of friendship or ambition, bumps the pail and earns a sprinkle of damp grit as a medal. You shake the grit away, and the gloss remains, a thin moon fixed fast to iron. You pause at a stall, where the hooks hang empty, like notes waiting for a song. The butcher nods the nod reserved for people who look as though they might know a price, but are unlikely to pay it just now. He keeps his own keys somewhere under his apron, small and specific, for a cool store where air is the housekeeper and salt is the clerk. Yours are tourists by comparison, taking in the view and collecting smears. You return his nod with the gravity of a person chaperoning unhelpful guests. A quirky habit belongs to this street and hour. Some passers-by hold a little nosegay to their face time, rosemary or marjoram bound with thread to teach the air its manners. Others dampen a sponge with vinegar and keep it in a small stoppered jar, lifting it for a breath as they walk by the busiest blocks. You have tried both in different seasons. The herb persuades your temper. The vinegar persuades your nose. Neither speaks a word to iron. The key keeps its new polish and grows proud. You step onto the raised footing to let a trolley pass, its wheels humming a hymn that does not quite agree with the stones. Above, the signboards hang still enough to hear a bull, a knife, a crown, and the sun discovers a tiny angle from which to be generous. In that narrow light, your ring looks like coin. The flattery lasts 3 steps, and then a cooler patch returns the metal to its ordinary shade of stubborn. Here, the rules our old dance partners know by memory. Washings carried off, offal gone before the next bell, hides kept where they do not invent new languages with flies. People speak of fines, as if they were distant cousins who visit now and then, and the men who enforce them do so with the wary authority of those who prefer cooperation over theater. Even so, the gutter holds more stories than the rules intend. The water today is thin and reasonable. By noon, it will be eloquent. Your keys pleased to be included in local customs, discover the rail again. The long tooth your ambitious scholar wears its gloss like a ribbon. You try the old trick of ash, rubbing a pinch between finger and cloth to make a humble polish that steals shine from where you do not want it. The ash makes a gray humility and leaves your apron with a square of honesty. The gloss keeps a ghost of itself, as if to say that markets are stronger than laundry. Cats patrol the edges with the air of constables. One eyes your ring with what could be judgment or appetite. It is hard to tell with cats. A dog passes, having joined itself to a man who pretends otherwise, and the dog believes you are carrying delicacies for its private inspection. Your iron disappoints it. The dog moves on to a more theatrical hope, and the cat resumes its round with the satisfaction of a clerk who has stamped something important. Not everything about this place is agreed upon in tidy rooms where arguments convalesce. Historians still argue whether most slaughtering in York Shambles was done on the street itself through this century, with blood and washings managed there and then, or whether much of the cutting came from animals already killed elsewhere. The stalls serving mainly for dressing and sale. The ordinances wandered over time, and the records speak with many voices. You give the question your usual answer. Whichever version is correct today, you will remember to watch your step. You make a small experiment born of mischief. With your thumb, you turn the glossy tooth inward so it faces your gown, as if shame could cure shine. The fabric accepts the joke and takes a faint crescent as payment. The key, now hiding its vanity against wool, clinks with what you choose to interpret as remorse. You threaten it with a thorough scrubbing later, and continue at the measured pace this lane encourages. A butcher's wife sweeps her step, then throws a look up at the sky the way some people consult a clock. She tucks a sprig of pennyroyal behind her ear, and your keys admire the decision by making a sound that might be applause if iron could vote. A bucket balances from a hook, and a trickle from its lip maps the stone with a bright curve. The line finds the gutter and remembers the old road toward the river. You walk the length slowly, not because you must, but because it is a kind of reading. Each block says something about the house behind it: careful, busy, lucky, tired. Each rail remembers a different history of hands. Your ring, picking up the voices, tries to translate into taps. Tap for a long morning, tap for a short one, tap for a price that will be better after noon. The gloss takes none of this into account. It sits and shines and resists your better efforts. There are people who swear by bread heel for such troubles. Rub the heel on the metal, and it will pull the grease away, they say, leaving the key seasoned like a pan. You try the heel you have in your pocket, and the bread agrees, taking a sheen from the tooth, and rewarding you with a smell somewhere between breakfast and vanity. The key is improved. Your pocket now promises to smell like a small feast, until you remember to wash it. The street rises a finger's breadth toward daylight, and then descends again into its work. You pass the last of the rails and the smell eases, trading tallow and hide for damp timber and a whisper of yeast from a door you cannot see. Your iron sighs as if released from a vow, and then tests your pocket for the bread heel it cannot have. You let the ring rest against your apron, and it decides very briefly to be still. When you look back, the narrow view between leaning houses seems no narrower than before. It is only your attention that is less crowded. You have learned nothing useful, as usual, and carried away a bright proof of it on one key and a new duty for your laundry. This pleases you. The day likes people who collect small burdens instead of large ones. You leave the Shambles with your quiet ceremony intact, your steps ordinary, your iron well acquainted with grease and now with bread. A final courtesy. You wipe your hand on the inside of your apron, where no eye will be obliged to have an opinion. The gloss, softened, becomes a memory instead of a boast. The ring answers with a decorous clink. You step into the wider street and feel the air change its mind. The Shambles keeps its secrets. Your keys keep theirs. Between them, they have conspired to make you smell faintly of kitchen, which is no insult at all. You turn where the street widens toward the Guildhall and the river, and your iron announces you before your face does. The Ouse breathes a cool damp behind the buildings, and tar from a mooring rope lends the air a stern sweetness. The hall sits back with its old confidence, stone, timber, and a porch that has watched more nods than quarrels, and prefers both to be brief. A porter at the doorway shifts his weight, measures your ring with a professional glance, and gives you the nod that says you belong to the furniture of town, even if no one could say which chair. The door is an essay in oak and iron. Bands lie across it like quiet ribs, and round-headed studs keep their little planets of soot polish from 100 hands passing and 100 rains forgetting. You let your ring brush one band, and the sound it makes answers the porter's nod better than words. The hall keeps its own big key, of course, large enough to demand a particular pocket in a particular coat. Your collection is merely social, companions with nothing to do but be seen. The porter reads the noise and files you under trustworthy, unimportant, which suits you perfectly. In a city like York, the Guildhall is where the corporation meets, where merchants hear themselves made respectable by minutes and oaths, where civic business is shelved in oak and spoken over by men who are fond of tables. That is the respectable fact. This is the town's room for its public face, the place that keeps charters safe, levies counted, and quarrels put into decent order. You feel it in the echo under the porch, and in the way footfalls become better behaved as they cross the threshold, as if sound itself were remembering to wipe its shoes. Respectable facts bring odd little cousins. On cold mornings, the door porter warms a flat pebble at the hearth and presses it briefly to the keyhole, before first turning the better to persuade a sulky lock. He swears by it, though you suspect the persuasion begins in his hand and not in the hole. A junior clerk keeps a box of fine sand to dress wet ink on petitions. He sprinkles with the solemn gravity of a priest and calls the dust pounce when he wishes to disguise how ordinary it is. Such gestures make small machines of a morning: pebble, key, sand, signature. You stand aside and look at the water between buildings, a narrow silver thought of the Ouse that minds its work without telling you about it. A boatman coughs into his sleeve and the sound comes round the corner as if it had walked on two legs. Pigeons test the eaves for conversation and concede that the day is still writing itself. Your ring speaks to the stone at your hip, an intimate tap that neither asks nor answers, merely stating that you are accompanied and intend to behave. Inside, if you were to follow, you would find benches buffed by more decisions than the wood cares to remember, a council table that has learned to accept elbows without judgment, and a chest with more locks than one person deserves to keep. In many English towns, such chests, the common chest, the treasury coffer, are made with 3 locks, so that 3 officers must appear together with 3 keys, producing a small pageant of honesty before any document can be freed. That is the respectable fact of caution, not distrust exactly, just the habit of making virtue hinge-shaped. You notice small engineering. The stone threshold lifts a thumb higher than the pavement so rain will think twice. A narrow slot near the jamb lets a bar slide home unseen. The hinge holds its breath under a cover plate like a secret that is not ashamed to be obvious. Your iron, flattered by such company, gives a little shiver and touches oak again, as if to say it understands the language, even if it cannot speak it. The porter raps his knuckles once on the lintel, a private benediction for timber and weather. Not everyone agrees on how public this room is meant to be in your century. Historians still argue whether ordinary townsfolk were welcome to stand at the edge during much business in the 1602nd, or whether doors were kept politely narrow except on special days. The records list men present without honoring those who waited outside, and drawings prove more about pride than policy. You like the uncertainty. It lets you imagine both versions with equal comfort and carry yourself decently in either. A smell labors out through the joint where door meets jamb, beeswax from a polished rail, ink that is given up pretending to be discreet, wool that has lately admitted rain. Your keys take that breath and make it their own. So when you move again, you carry away a faint parliament on your belt. The porter notices only that you still have not asked a question. He is content to have nodded at the right sort of ring. You are content to have been misread in a way that costs no one anything. Errands arrive like punctuation. A boy brings a folded paper, sealed with something that pretends to be wax. It flinches under the porter's eye and goes inside. An older man appears with a string-wrapped bundle of accounts and the stern patience of someone who will sit on a bench until it yields. A woman with a basket whispers with the clerk, and the clerk writes a line that will later be read as if it were wisdom. Your iron comments on each arrival with small civility. A tap for the paper, a tap for the string, a tap for the whisper you cannot hear. On the wall near the door is a list roughed in chalk, a column of initials that indicates who has arrived early enough to look conscientious. The porter smears one letter with the heel of his hand and redraws it properly, delighted to have improved the day. People will walk in, see the tidy letter, and decide that business can be trusted. The trick works as well on ink as on iron. You have seen a dull key look authoritative simply because someone wiped it with a clean rag before handing it to a stranger. A fringe custom lives in buildings like this, tapping a key against the frame before locking at night, a promise made to the wood that it will be remembered by the hand in the morning. You have seen it in other streets and felt superstitious for admiring it. The porter does it sometimes when he thinks no one is watching, and then looks embarrassed, as if courtesy to doors were a vice. You prefer a city where someone thanks a hinge. You do not need this room today. Your errands are smaller than benches, and your decisions will be made in kitchens where chairs wobble. Still, you have borrowed something from the doorway, a small weight of order, an echo that persuades your feet to choose their sounds, and a nod that covers a multitude of inexactnesses in the matter of keys. You could explain the truth that your iron is a choir without a choir book, but the porter's nod has already written a kinder sentence on the morning. You keep it. You turn away with that small windfall in your pocket, which is to say, at your belt. The ouse has found a brighter color. The rope has found a drier voice. The door sighs as it settles to minding the edge between inside and out. Your keys perform their modest farewell on the oak once, then on the stone step, and then on your hip, as if to register each material fairly. The porter, satisfied that decorum has been served, looks past you for the next person whose ring will tell him a story he prefers to believe. You give the city back a nod of your own and walk on, neither more official nor less ordinary than before. The Guildhall keeps its counsel. You keep your clink. Between the two of you, a bargain has been struck. Appearances may do some light lifting, and no one will be harmed. Your iron finds its rhythm again, votes quietly in a meeting that will not count it, and escorts you toward streets where nods come cheaper indoors. Mercifully, ask nothing at all. You reach the locksmith's doorway, because it is the sort of doorway that invites hands as much as feet. The lintel is dark where palms have stroked it absent-mindedly on the way in. The threshold is polished in two crescents that speak of customers who changed their minds at the last instant. Above your head, a small board creaks on its iron hanger, cut in the outline of a fat key, and the wind makes it nod, as if it were approving your errand. Your ring taps the jamb without being asked, and then pretends it thought better of it. The shop keeps two lights, one from the street and one from the back where charcoal remembers yesterday. The air is a map oil, iron, a patient ash, and the sweet sharpness of scraped brass. You stand just inside and let your eyes agree to the dimness. On the left, a board carries examples, long worded keys, short ones with careful bits, bows cut with little ornaments like clover, fish, and knots. Beside the board sits the small chest the locksmith keeps for sport and trade alike, a stout box with several keyholes and no promises. People are encouraged to try any key they carry and learn a lesson about patience. The locksmith looks up with the natural gravity of someone who has taught metal how to listen. He nods toward the chest, a courteous invitation to fail politely. You set your ring in your palm and choose the modest, long key that has been with you since the uncle who believed in storerooms. It is slender where it meets the bit, earnest in its ambition. You present it to the first keyhole as one might present a letter, and the wards inside refuse with a dignity that is not unkind. The locksmith does not smile. He has seen many mornings and many refusals, and he honors each with the same silence. You try the second keyhole square, a little proud of its rim. The key meets the ward, thinks, and then shakes its head with a small iron scrape. You try a third, and a fourth, as one recites familiar lines in hopes the ending has been edited overnight. The chest holds its breath like a patient schoolmaster. Beside you on the bench rests a file with a handle wrapped in scrap leather, a drill with a bow that remembers many wrists, and a little stick for oil beside a clay pot that keeps the oil tempered. In 17th century England, most household locks in shops like this are warded boxes, honest iron with interior obstacles shaped to admit only a faithful key. Padlocks, chest locks, and door locks share the family resemblance. That is the respectable fact, smelling faintly of oil and soot, and it sits here as plainly as the bench itself. The respectable fact travels with a shop trick you admire. The locksmith dips a brush of goose feather into lampblack and tallow, then strokes the inside face of a keys bit before trying it in a new-made lock, where the black rubs away, the ward has spoken, and the file will answer. You have seen him do it with quiet pride, as if reading a letter in soot. A quirk, too, lives on the threshold. A small bell made from old keybows strung on wire, ready to ring if someone enters too briskly. It sounds like household authority practicing for church. You consider the chest again and offer it your square-bowed key, the vain friend who likes to be admired by sunlight. It is too fat for the first hole and too honest for the second. The locksmith lifts an eyebrow that says nothing about you and everything about iron. He draws the chest toward him and opens it with a key of his own that looks dull on purpose, then closes it again with the same modest turn. The lesson, like most lessons here, lies in the difference between made to fit and meant to impress. On the far wall hangs a neat row of blanks, keys not yet taught to speak, filed to a hopeful middle shape. A boy at the back works a small hand bellows for the side fire, and the charcoal answers with a whisper rather than a roar. A vice grips a humble shank, while a file explains something to it in the patient language of strokes. Historians still argue whether shops like this in towns beyond London mostly made locks entire on site throughout the century, or whether many bought in rough-made cases and focused chiefly on fitting and filing keys for neighbors' records, talk about locks and work, without always naming what was done where. The dispute sits comfortably with the hush of the room. You let it remain an argument for men with cleaner hands. You shift your weight, and your ring makes its opinions known. The locksmith looks at your collection with the soft recognition reserved for fellow travelers. He gestures toward the chest as if to say there is no shame in being a guest here, even if none of your companions speak the local dialect. You oblige him by trying the long, thin one with the fishy bit. It slides in as if it has thoughts, then pauses, meeting a ward that has been waiting all morning to be admired. The pause is a kind no means. A woman enters, her own ring tidier, practical and domestic. She asks for a small lock for a sugar press, nothing grand, only honest and willing to be turned by a person with wet hands and poor light. The locksmith produces a little lock that looks capable of both virtues, dips its key in oil as if in blessing, and shows her how to turn with a patience that will not scold when she forgets. She sets a coin on the bench. The bell made of keybows answers her exit with a brave little speech that makes everyone present feel more official than they are. You return to the board of examples and touch, with permission, a key whose bow is cut in the shape of a heart. It is purely ornamental, useless to your purpose, useful to someone else's idea of stewardship. The locksmith says that bows sometimes take this softness to make it plain whose key it is, so it will be handed back rather than pocketed by mistake. He has also seen bows notched and stamped with small marks that mean more to the household than to the street. He says this without looking at you, as if keys minded modesty. There is a jar of filings on the bench, gray as morning. Some say filings sifted into oil make the oil remember where it is needed most. Others say filings are simply proof that work was attempted. The locksmith uses the filings to dust a paper where he means to write the measure of a shank. The grit tames the tallow and keeps his quill from sliding. The paper looks suddenly older and more serious. You admire the thrift of a life where everything becomes something else when asked. Not all doors in this city want iron. Some are content with a wooden latch and a bar that slides into a tunnel within the thickness of the door, a simple cousin to the complicated chest on the bench. Some are overseen by a pin with a string, so a hand can lift from outside without being quite outside. Historians still argue whether such latch strings were really kept out for neighbors as a general custom, or whether the phrase belongs more to cheerful sayings than to daily practice in towns. People like the idea of trust, and memory likes it best of all. You like the saying and the latch both, and keep both in your head without troubling either with proof. You offer the chest your square key once more, this time to a lower hole that seems to listen more kindly. The key meets the ward, bows, and accepts that today is not its day. The locksmith gives you a glance that says the lesson is complete, and also says you may keep trying as long as it pleases you. You choose to stop so the chest can remain slightly magical, and your iron can remain slightly foolish. You thank the room as you leave. Bench, board, bell, chest, man, boy, and the quiet fire that keeps workshops honest. Your ring answers the thanks with a small, dignified clink, as if it had been the one invited to judge. Outside, the light has improved without boasting. You feel your pockets lighter for having failed at a game that was designed to be lost. The locksmith's doorway keeps its two lights. Your day keeps its quiet weight. As you step back to the street, your keys discover the door's tread and mark it with a sound that is almost a compliment. You carry away a little soot on your fingers, a small smell of oil in your sleeve, and the certain knowledge that the wards you met today are patient as weather and as unconcerned with you as rain. You like them for it. You tighten your belt by a thought's width and let the ring settle where it will. Some doors open, some do not. Your companions prefer the latter, and you accept their preference the way you accept your own. Market day makes a theater of your iron. You come onto pavement where the stalls grow from the stones like sensible mushrooms, each with its own shade of canvas, each with a smell that votes for itself. Your ring taps the haft of a scale as you edge past, and the vendor, swift with banter, lifts your keys onto the pan with a grin, weighing your morning as if it were a vegetable. The beam thinks, wavers, and settles. He declares the heap dearer than turnips, and not half as useful. You pay in laughter, which is the lightest coin, and take back your clatter with a bow. The square opens itself by habit. Carts nose to the edge, baskets bloom into pyramids, and a boy learns to shout without frightening hens. St. Crux watches with the patience of old stone, while a bell somewhere counts the hour with the confidence of someone who has never been wrong. In towns like York through this century, weekly markets are the city's steady lungs. Weights checked, measures declared, tolls gathered under municipal eyes so buying can feel like good manners. That is the respectable fact, and you can feel it in the fairness of the beam and the way the clerk's chalk keeps tidy accounts on a slate that has seen many mornings. Respectable fact. Meat market quirk. A woman at a dairy board dips a hollowed stick into brine, then smears a thread of it across a cheese to show the buyer the rind's obedience. A herb wife lifts a tiny nosegay to the nose and swears the marjoram remembers last summer perfectly if you pay in full. A fruit seller rubs an apple on his sleeve until it shines like a sermon. Your keys, not wishing to be left out, kiss a trestle and pick up a flour dust fingerprint as if they had bought bread without telling you. You let yourself be drawn by the geometry of scale pans. Brass circles rocked into truth by a thumb's gentle argument. The vendor taps one pan and slips on a standard weight that looks like a sleeping spool. He asks if you would like to trade your bundle of authority for a cabbage that at least opens when asked. You decline with the dignity of a person who understands she is keeping symbols. The pan shivers when you lift the ring. Iron leaves and the cabbage wins its hour. Across the square, a man sells pins as if they were ideas. He lets you take one, tests its point on a scrap of wool, and tells you to keep it sweet with a touch of tallow. Your iron approves the notion of small order and answers with a thrum against your girdle that draws the attention of a child who wants to know if you are a doorkeeper from a grand house. You confess you are a doorkeeper with no door. The child nods as if this is a kind of magic and returns to important pigeon business. Rain thinks about beginning and decides to wait. You step around a fishmonger's tub where water carries a quick, cold speech. Your keys, reaching for applause, tap the lip and come away scented with the sea you did not order. Sand skitters underfoot. A broom announces another stall open for honesty. The clerk of the market pauses to watch, chalk held like a mild scepter, making sure measures behave in public. Some towns keep a public bushel to settle arguments. You imagine it dozing on a shelf like a judge between trials. Historians still argue whether the name pavement here came from an unusually early paved surface, or from the sense of a paved place set apart for proclamation, market, and muster, with the first stones laid as civic theater as much as for clean feet. Records are helpful but coy. Maps whisper one thing, and memory another. You enjoy the uncertainty. It lets the square feel both solid and ceremonial at once. A boy at the treacle barrel dips a slotted spoon and lets shine write itself back into the cask. Your ring answers the spectacle by clinking at your side like applause from a polite balcony. You shift the bunch to rest on apron rather than bone, and the clatter softens to an approving murmur. Your hand comes away with a faint sugar tack that refuses to wash off in anything but patience. Later, you will taste it without meaning to and think of the square. A stall of second-hand goods offers a scattering of locks without keys and keys without stories. Iron orphans waiting for adoptions that will never suit them. You touch one thin prim with a little heart cut into the bow and set it down before it can mistake you for a better future. The vendor tells you such pieces make good charms if tied with red thread. He says they keep mischief on the polite side of the threshold. You think your mischief already clatters loudly enough to be harmless. You take 2 steps backward to see the whole, the square making itself useful, colors modest as turnips, smells honest as rain. Your keys have acquired a flower kiss, a fish whisper, and a sugar fingerprint, which is to say they have eaten breakfast by accident. You wipe them with the inside of your apron, and the day rewards you with a clean-smelling cloth and iron that now carries the market's voice wherever you go. As you leave, the vendor with the beam calls after you, asking if those keys ever open anything at all. You tell him they open the morning when you walk, and he declares that answer worth a farthing if only farthings could be paid in words. You nod, and the ring gives the trestle one last civil tap, the market's punctuation mark at the end of its first sentence. The square continues without you, perfectly capable. Your clatter goes on, dearer than turnips in no useful way, and exactly as necessary as the sound of your own steps. Rain rehearses on Petergate the way a fiddler rehearses in the lane, tentative, faithful, ready to be bolder. You feel it first as a cool whisper on the back of your hand, then as a conviction along the seam of your sleeve. The keys report the weather before the sky finishes its sentence. Each step makes the ring nudge your thigh with a chill that feels like a small rebuke. Iron loves dry mornings. Wet ones teach it new ways to bite. Petergate draws a narrow line toward the Minster, the houses leaning inward as if to share a cloak. The gutters remember yesterday's decisions and resume them, asking water to mine the edges while feet keep the middle. You test your pace to find the one that makes the least noise and the fewest splashes. The attempt is gallant and hopeless. The keys experience puddles as invitations to remark upon your bones. A cold thud answers your hip when you dodge, and another when you do not. In towns like this, a wet day is an honest day. Tiled roofs drum, thatch hisses, and thresholds lift themselves a timid thumb, so water must ask permission to enter. People who own pattens strap them on and learn to walk like citizens of stilts. People who do not keep to the higher seams of the street and bless every place where stone has remembered to be level. That is the respectable fact of rain, and town no tragedy, only more housekeeping for the body. Respectable fact meets street wisdom. A neighbor told you once to tuck a strip of soft leather between the 2 longest keys when weather turns, to quiet their quarrel and keep the metal from numbing your side. You do it now, tying the knot with fingers that remember 100 knots just like it. It helps until it doesn't. Another friend swears by rubbing a candle end along the inside of the ring, so the water sheets away. Your candle obeys for 3 corners, then forgets. Petergate offers shelter by the inch. Shop fronts jut just enough to make a promise you can believe for 5 breaths at a time. You share ledges with strangers and trade those courteous half-smiles that say, "We are not made of paper, but neither are we fools." The keys, when pressed lightly against the jamb, learn a brief warmth from wood. When released, they remember they are weather students and resume thudding their lessons. The Minster stone lets the rain turn it into a darker hymn. You watch the facade consider its own wet, and think of hands that lifted each weight into place. Hands that knew both sun and gray days longer than yours. A verger crosses the yard with a key bunch that could serve as a defense against wolves, the iron swinging like a statement carved in air. Your ring, in the presence of such purpose, chooses to be a modest footnote. It still bites when you step, but it does so with better manners. Historians still argue whether towns like York in this century saw pattens on most ordinary feet in wet months, or whether such clatters belonged mainly to those who spent long hours in market lanes. Images flatter fashion, and inventories count shoes more readily than straps. The question is cheerful and not pressing. Your own feet vote for whatever keeps wool dry and bones convinced. Today that means a slower walk and a tolerance for appearing cautious. A quirky practice belongs to rain and errand running. Some tuck a vinegar-soaked rag into a little wooden cup with holes, lifting it to the face when gutters argue with deeper scents. Others carry a twist of rosemary and mint and tell themselves the leaves are brave. You pass a woman who has made a tiny hood for her basket, stitched from oiled cloth and decorated with 2 earnest buttons. Your keys tap the button as you squeeze by and come away with a small proclamation of having met ingenuity. Water finds its way inside more reliably than people do. A thread of it slips under your cuff and runs down to meet the warmth of your palm. Another tries the collar and decides against ambition. The ring, coaxed by motion and discourteous gravity, climbs and falls on its thong like a slow metronome. You press it for a moment against your apron to share your heat. It accepts and then forgets being iron. A man under a porch lifts his hat to you. The porch is new to him. The hat is old to everybody, and asks whether the rain will keep at it. You say it will, because rain in a city like this respects its assignment once it has accepted it. He taps a puddle with his stick, turning a map of the sky into circles. Your ring answers the stick with 2 calm notes, and for a breath the 3 of you man. Stick, iron are a small band with no audience, and the right to be pleased with yourselves. A cart passes quietly, as if the driver were sneaking up on the street. Even wheels practice politeness in wet. You step into the wake and feel the keys choose that moment to instruct your hip again. You accept the lesson. The day is made of small compromises. You will be damp, the iron will be colder, you will not pretend otherwise, and still you will walk where you said you would. At the next doorway, you wait for the sky to complete a thought. The rain achieves a steadiness that removes debate. You breathe the smell that wet stone teaches lime newly eloquent, mortar confident, lichen thoughtful, and allow yourself to enjoy what you did not ask for. The keys, witnesses to this persuasion, calm a degree. When you move again, their thud is an accompaniment rather than a protest. You are still a person carrying metal that opens nothing, and yet motion feels like consent instead of defiance. By the time you reach the yard again, the rain has written your morning into your sleeves. You could complain. You do not. You prefer to count the comforts that remain obedient. Warm blood, honest fabric, a city that knows what to do with water. Your ring is colder than the rest of you, and speaks in taps instead of sentences. You hear it, and answer by stepping. Between the 2 of you, weather becomes a conversation that you are in no hurry to end. Minster Yard takes the world and lowers its voice. Even carts pass with a kind of courtesy here, and boots remember to keep heel and toe from arguing. You cross the green edge where grass pretends it belongs in a city, and your ring, lately theatrical in the market and sullen in the rain, chooses dignity. It taps once against your belt, as if to announce that it knows where it is. Ahead, a verger moves with that particular purpose that belongs to people who keep keys that matter. His bunch is a litany long stems, heavy bows, teeth-shaped to stories only stone can repeat. You let your iron hang still so as not to seem to be boasting. The verger's keys are the sort that turn iron tongues in ancient doors, unlocking not privilege but passage to silence. In cathedrals and great churches, vergers and sextons throughout this century keep boxes and vestry presses, script chests and tower doors, opening and closing with a rhythm that makes prayer possible and dust honest. That is the respectable fact, and you admire it, the way a passerby admires a craft they will never learn, with unworried envy. Respectable fact, meet ale quirk. Near the porch, a little board leans where visitors strike a spill to borrow fire for their hand candles before evensong. The spills are twigs, shaved and tidy, set in a jar that looks as if it had once held tansy. Some old women say a pinch of crushed rosemary in the wax keeps the wick from sulking. Others say rosemary belongs in a meat pie and should mind its kitchen. The verger ignores such counsel and keeps his stock plain, trusting air and patience more than herbs. You stand at the threshold where air cools simply because it has been instructed to, and press your palm to your own ring until you feel the iron grow a little human. The door you do not open today shows its grammar in oak boards, pegs, skin of time, and the key plate sits like a stern mouth awaiting the correct reply. Your square-bowed show-off glances at the plate with unhelpful interest. You let it look. Looking is free. A young chorister slips across the yard with books held like a sleeping cat. He nods at the verger's keys as one nods at thunder, respectfully, as to a power that shapes a day whether or not one understands how. Your iron gives a small knock against the bench by the door, as if requesting to be noticed. It is not, and feels relief. Sometimes it is best to be furniture in a room that knows its uses. Historians still argue whether ordinary townsfolk could wander the nave on most weekdays in this century, or whether chapter orders often confined foot traffic to services and necessary errands. Accounts name feast crowds and special processions lovingly, leaving weekdays to the margin. The uncertainty suits the yard's sound. A public place that remembers being private. A private place that performs being public. You prefer to imagine a lad with a bundle stepping in, to breathe a drier air, and then leaving it as he found it, which is to say better. You sit a heartbeat on a stone ledge and practice being still. The verger fits his biggest key to a door that has learned how to accept it, turning with that heavy grace that good locks show when asked the right question. The sound is a deep wooden gulp more than an iron scrape. Your ring answers with a soft chime that is not strictly necessary. No one scolds you for it. The yard makes room for small noises the way it makes room for pigeons, tolerantly and with a secret wish that they would be neater. A quirk you like. In some churches, a little basket of folded squares of linen sits by the font for mothers to lay under a baby's head, not to protect the stone, but to let the stone be polite. Old women fold them while talking about weather, as if they were writing a letter to the weak. The verger today has no basket visible. Perhaps the folding happens out of sight, which is where most good things happen. You look at your iron and consider for the 100th time calling on the verger's instruction, asking him to name each tooth and bow by work and worth, to let you lift his bundle long enough to learn the weight of doors that have opinions. You do not. His authority is earned by hours and bells, not by curiosity. You keep your ring as a private joke and a public courtesy, and your feet as the means by which you leave rooms to people who serve them. Rain hushes and light considers being generous. The yard brightens a shade that stone understands as permission. The verger moves on, keys answering him like obedient dogs. You stand and your ring practices a small gravity against your hip, a reminder that you carry an emblem of stewardship with none of its obligations. The thought is pleasant. Symbols are lighter than duties even when they are iron. At the door's hinge, a drop of water clings to the knuckle, perfect as a bead in a careful cloth. Your long, thin key longs to taste the metal and learn the hinge's language. You deny it the game and content yourself with watching the drop pick its moment and fall without drama. The sound it makes on stone is the quietest part of the morning. You walk the yard's edge as if reading the city's margin notes. A mason's mark sits in a corner no one bothers to see. A bird has taken theology upon itself and made a commentary on the downspout. Your keys agree to be still while you pass. When they swing again at the gate, they sound like humility put on for company, which is a fair costume in places like this. You take it with you into the noisier street, and remember to step as if you own no doors at all. Curfew will come later, but the watchman already has opinions about your music. You meet him where two lanes argue about becoming one, his halberd easy on his shoulder, his lantern dark for now but confident that night will require it. He listens to your ring for the space of 6 steps, and then grins like a man who has learned to tie as many knots as there are nights in a year. He produces a narrow strap of soft leather from a pocket that has educated many small annoyances and shows you how to bind the two noisiest keys so they will behave when bells do their work. Night in a town like this travels with a grammar. Lamps where they can be afforded, shutters closed with the promise of reopening, and the watch walking the sentences between. The curfew bel couvre-feu in the old French that once told us to cover fire still makes its long thought across the roofs, asking hearths to bank their blaze and doors to remember the difference between inside and out. That is the respectable fact, familiar as bread, and the watchman speaks it without moving his lips. Respectable fact has a cousin in quiet craft. He threads your strap between bow and bow, twists once, pulls twice, and produces a tidy knot that looks like a small ear. Leather listens, he says, and proves it by making your clatter into a thud polite enough to attend church. He shows you another trick. When the bell begins, slide a scrap of cloth under the ring where it meets the buckle so iron will not answer metal with its own sermon. You try his method, and your hip thanks him in the language of not being bitten. You ask what he does with his own keys. He says that at night he keeps the ward key for the ward gate tied to his belt by a loop he can find with numb fingers, and the rest on a thong that rides higher than mischief can reach. He will not say whether mischief has reached him anyway. His grin implies that stories belong to benches and ale, not to midday corners. Your ring nods against your side, as if it understands discretion. Historians still argue whether curfew in towns like York through this century meant an actual extinguishing of most household fires at the bell, or a ritual banking and shutting that acknowledged danger without begging the dark to rule. Ordinances instruct, diaries remember, and both serve their masters. You prefer the version where the bell is a neighborly suggestion that would be thoughtful and that people let night practice being night. Your own hearth knows how to be safe and stubborn at the same time. A quirky practice belongs to the watch in this place. Some men chalk a small mark on a chosen doorpost, at the turning of the hour a straight line for all's well, when feet have found no quarrel to settle. Rain eats the mark when it needs to. Morning shrugs the rest away. The watchman shows you the stub of chalk he keeps in the seam of his hat. Your keys, newly muffled, tap the halberd shaft once like a student promising to remember a lesson. He tells you to mind the corners later. Thieves love a corner that teaches them who is coming by sound alone. You say your ring will be polite, and he says politeness is a better defense than boldness most nights, but neither is perfect. His lantern swings a little as he adjusts the strap, an unlit moon rehearsing its duty. He calls the strap a sleeper's knot because it lets a household doze while someone walks under their windows without arguing with every hinge in the parish. You test your new silence with 3 steps and discover it is not silence at all, only good behavior. The thud is warm, the bite a memory, and the bell you cannot yet hear seems to approve in absentia. The watchman, satisfied, tucks his leather back into the coat that knows his habits and wishes you an evening in which your keys will mean nothing to anyone. It is the kindest wish you have heard in days. A boy runs past with a message he cannot read. His reed, penned behind the ear, makes him look scholarly enough that the street grants him room. Your ring answers his speed with a docile sound that does not trip him. Somewhere someone props a shutter with a spoon, and wood learns once more how to be latch. You try the strap tighter and then looser, learning the middle where iron accepts instruction without sulking. There is a superstition about bells that your grandmother kept. Do not count them aloud when they are speaking their curfew, lest the number catch you like a hook and make you late for your better self. You count them in your head anyway sometimes, and forgive yourself afterward. The watchman, hearing not your thoughts but the way you hold your breath, says the bell will mind its own arithmetic tonight, and you should mind your feet. He is right. Feet keep you safe more often than numbers do. You part with a nod, and he goes to his appointed sentences while you go to yours. Your keys, no longer quarreling with themselves, learn a gentler language that might pass in a lane after dark without becoming a public announcement. You are not a thief, not a constable, not an important citizen. You are someone who chooses a careful strap at the right hour and treats iron as a neighbor to be kept in good temper. When the bell speaks this evening, you will hear it and cover flame without fuss. For now, you carry the watchman's knot with the same care you carry your day. A bundle of firewood persuades your keys to rehearse new verses. You shoulder the truss and the ring climbs the thong, thumping your ribs like a polite but persistent guest. You shift. Iron adjusts. The wood argues across your back with twig logic that refuses advice. The lane narrows to make the lesson firmer. You discover again that weight teaches you about your own bones, and that iron loves to keep time for effort, offering a soft thud whenever breath remembers itself. Fuel is citizenship in a northern town. Faggots for common hearths. Billets when coin agrees, and where trade permits. Sea coal or pit coal that burns longer and sulks with a different smell. 17th century York knows all three, with price and wind deciding the week. That is the respectable fact you hear in every yard. Smoke speaking dialects. Purses answering in short words. Your hearth will accept either language so long as flame arrives on time. Respectable fact? Meat carrying quirk. Some lift the bundle with a forked stick. Others nod ahead. Strap and walk the weight along the spine with a dignity that persuades passers. Bite apart. You were taught the compromise. Brace one end on hip, steady with forearm. Hold breath for the first steps when sticks try to sign their names on your ribs. Your ring, wishing to participate, contributes a timed knock at each change of grip, a metronome for the tune of small effort. At the corner, a neighbor offers his block and axe, promising to kiss a few pieces shorter for your stove's temper. He finds the seam and lets iron choose where to fall. The wedge speaks a wooden syllable that sounds like consent. Your keys applaud with a knock against the block that leaves a tiny crescent scar. He lifts an eyebrow at your ring the way men salute a uniform they cannot place, and returns to tidy strokes that make kindling of the day. You heave the truss, and the ring thumps its complaint at a different angle. You answer with the old treatment. Slide a fold of apron between iron and bone. Turn the square-bowed offender outward so its vanity faces weather and not your side. And accept that comfort rarely lasts as long as work. A small trick helps. Rub a breath of tallow along the thong to keep it from sawing its own hole. Then wipe it off again, remembering how ash will gladly turn fat into paste the moment you sit. Historians still argue whether middling households in York leaned chiefly on coal by habit through this century, or whether wood persisted in kitchens where cooks preferred its pace and perfume. Accounts name loads and prices, but kitchens remember noses. You keep the useful answer, both according to purse and wind. Let paper keep its quarrel. Your chimney will believe your hand. A boy tails you with a barrow of chips, hoping for a trade armful for a coin, or a rumor for an apple end. You give him a biscuit crumb you had forgotten in your pocket. He admires you anyway. Your keys tap the barrow rim as if testing its axle, harvest a flake of resin, and decide they have helped enough. The boy rolls away whistling a tune that makes your bundle feel lighter by exactly one note. At a doorway, a backstone leans broad iron, waiting to bake oatcakes when the hearth runs to generosity. The sight coaxes noon into your mouth. Cake laid by the palm, edge flicked, steam released like a mild opinion. Your ring hears the thought and votes for it with two soft taps under your ribs. You promise yourself something small and hot, and promise the keys nothing at all. A superstition you keep. Never carry a bundle straight to flame. Let sticks remember the house in the passage first, so quarrels picked up in weather fall off before they are asked to burn politely. You rest the truss by the door, and your ring rests too, settling into a brief, merciful silence. The bruise under your ribs decides to become suggestion rather than complaint. Inside, the hearth greets wood with the patience of something blamed for everything and thanked for nothing. You set the bundle near but not on the warm, choosing the place where hisses encouragement, not offense. In houses like yours, irons hang within arm's argument, trammel or crane if fortunate. Pothooks, if prudent, so heat can keep both cooking and company. That is the respectable fact of labor and comfort sharing a room, and your shoulders are glad to be finished carrying for a while. You untie the watchman's strap, and the keys remember how to speak. Their voice is softer now, as if wood has taught iron patience. You rub the place at your ribs where the ring made its case, and then rub the ring itself. An apology sent through metal. Perhaps it arrives. The bundle waits for its turn to become flame. Your day waits for the next ordinary task. You have carried something heavy and set it down. The keys that open nothing have recorded the event with small, sincere punctuation. An alehouse bench receives you like an old friend, scraping first, forgiving after. You lower yourself. Your ring adds a note and leaves a thin scar where wood had hoped for gentler company. The tapster hears it and smiles, as if you had signed the bench. He brings a pewter pot that has seen more faces than a mirror and sets it down with the respect due to simple tools that do one thing well. Small ale answers the hour with bread you can drink, mild as a promise kept. You wrap the ring in your square of linen. Clatter becomes thud, a sound almost learned. The room smells of yeast, smoke, wool, and a faint green from hops that teaches tongues to be friendly. In 17th-century towns, alehouses are licensed parlors, where talk keeps weather company, and measures are watched pots sized by law, scales honest under civic eyes. That is the respectable fact. House quirks bloom around it, tallies chalked on a slate, a little basin of vinegar by the door for hands that have been too industrious, a fiddler who knows when to be furniture. Your keys, swaddled, admire their reflection in pewter, like a river that has learned manners. A vendor comes through with pins and claims a breath of tallow keeps them sweet. He is right. Historians still argue whether women sat alone in provincial alehouses as often as paintings flatter, or whether pictures ignore how reputations traveled faster than thirst. Records scold, diaries forget. You live in the version where faces are known, seats are earned by custom, and the door judges no one who carries their own quiet. When you rise, the bench gives a farewell, and your muffled ring offers one courteous knock more. You leave coin enough to be remembered, and not enough to be discussed, carrying away a warm breath of pewter, chalk on your sleeve, and iron that has learned for an hour to behave. You fold the ring into a square of linen before errands resume, patting bow from bow until each tooth has a pocket of quiet. Your hip thanks you at once. The cloth keeps a faint vinegar sweetness from the alehouse basin, and your iron smells briefly like a kitchen that is finished scolding. You tuck the wrapped bundle under apron edge so it rides on cloth instead of bone. Then try 3 trial steps. The sound becomes a well-mannered thud. In everyday English households, people wrap hard things in soft knives in cloth, pots in straw, keys in rag because fabric turns noise into patience. That is the respectable fact. A quirk you learned from an old neighbor. Stitch a tiny sachet of dried lavender inside the wrapping to give iron better dreams. You tried it once. It pleased you more than it persuaded metal. Historians still argue whether scented pouches belonged mostly to chests of linen and clothes presses, or also traveled in pockets and belts among middling townsfolk. Inventories name sweet bags, but not their wanderings. You settle the knot so it can be undone with cold fingers. Then slide a scrap of soft wool between the 2 bossiest keys, belt leather, wool, linen, then iron. A little litany of peace. The day answers kindly. You ease through a lane where shutters are learning to be open and pass a door where a woman beats a mat. Dust becomes sunlight for a breath. Your wrapped iron makes only a polite syllable, and the mat accepts the compliment. You promise yourself you will keep the cloth clean, and also promise, more honestly, that you will not. Rag will collect flour, grease, chalk, and the city's gossip. It will be the loudest quiet you own. For now, it is mercy on a thong, a hush you can wear, and a reminder that not every solution needs metal to agree. A neighbor asks if your ring might try her stubborn cupboard. You say yes, because saying yes costs less than explaining why your iron is ceremonial. The cupboard smells of pepper and old quince. The lock has a temper like a cat. You unwrap your bundle and present each key in turn, letting the bit find the ward the way a hand finds a familiar stair. First, is the long fish bit earnest, not clever. Second, the square-bowed show-off. Third, the humble thin one that remembers a storeroom from a different life. Each meets a refusal, dignified enough to admire. In townhouses like these, small box and cupboard locks are simple warded boxes filed by hand to suit a household's need. That is the respectable fact. A quirk that sometimes helps. Rub a trace of lampblack on the bit and see where the ward brushes it off. File there, and the metal will learn to pass. You do not file today. You are a guest, not a surgeon. Historians still argue whether ordinary cupboards were locked daily or only when sugar, spice, or visiting hands made prudence fashionable. Accounts mention press keys. Diaries mention tempers. Your neighbor watches with patient humor as you try 30 times what will not be tried. The cat sleeps through the performance, trusting that nothing truly important will change. When you are finished, you say what locksmiths say kindly. The lock is keeping its promise. She thanks you for the theater and presses a slice of sugared peel into your palm for the trouble. Your keys accept the sweet scent like a story. They will tell other doors. You wrap the bundle again and hang it back at your side, carrying away honesty, a faint stickiness, and the relief of having failed, where failure was free. People begin to ask you for small authorities, the iron implies. Could you witness a tally? Could you mind a basket while a child is scolded? Could you hold a corner of a rug while its dust is reasoned with? You do these things because they are kinds of doorkeeping that do not require a keyhole. In 17th century towns, reputation keeps more gates than iron does. That is the respectable fact. A quirk of language follows you. Someone calls you gatewise, which means nothing and enough. Historians still argue whether visible keys on a belt mostly mark the mistress of stores, or whether servants and clerks wore them openly while household heads preferred pegs indoors. Portraits flatter rank. Probate lists flatter furniture. You fetch water for a woman who cannot leave her dough. Hold a child's hand at the gutter's edge. Stand in a doorway while a message is whispered and then forgotten. Your wrapped ring thuds its assent to each small duty. A man asks if you could open his friend's bad luck with a turn. You say you are not that kind of locksmith, and he laughs as if you were. The day goes on in errands that are almost vows. Lend your back to a stool that wobbles, your eye to a ledger's crooked line, your palm to a door that is stuck on weather and pride. None of it requires teeth and warts. All of it requires being the sort of person who arrives with a sound that pretends to mean permission. By evening you have opened nothing that needed iron and several troubles that did not. Your ring, civilized by linen, grows warm like a creature that has learned to sit. You forgive it for what it cannot do, and admire it for the company it keeps for you while you do it. Children request your clatter on loan. They are building a city of chalk and brick chips, and require a sound for the alderman. You let them borrow the wrapped ring under covenant. No running, no puddles, no ladders that think too well of themselves. They parade with iron bouncing against small hips and pronounce judgments on imaginary markets. In every age, play rehearses duty. That is the respectable fact. A quirk appears at once. They appoint a door out of thin air, a sill stone, and insist it cannot be opened without your keys, though there is nothing behind it but more air. Historians still argue whether toy keys and mock locks show up much in the 17th century, outside of prints and grown-up jokes. Inventories list dolls and drums more readily than pretended furniture. You stand by, paid with laughter, and watch one solemn child perform the ceremony of unlocking the void, then bow to nothing as if a cupboard had consented. Your iron makes a gentle chime that seems to mean wisdom. It only means metal. When they return the bundle, they do it with ceremony, holding it on both palms like bread. You retie the knot with sober theater to please them. A mother thanks you for lending noise to an hour. It kept quarrels at arm's length. Your hip feels oddly bare while the ring is at work elsewhere. When it returns, its weight restores your balance like a book given back to its shelf. You think, not unkindly, that children take your keys more seriously than any door does. Perhaps that is enough usefulness for one afternoon. You walk to the Ouse and let water advise you. The river carries town business down its back rope tar, wash silt, a barley whisper from a warehouse, and ignores the arguments of banks. You lean on a post and watch your ring hang still, reflected as a small dark moon in a wavering band of light. In river towns, quays teach patience and measure. That is the respectable fact. A quirk you enjoy. Boatmen polish a favorite peg with tallow, so the mooring rope learns it quickly. The peg shines like a gentleman's shoe. Historians still argue whether ordinary townsfolk came to the water for strolling as often as paintings pretend, or chiefly for washing, fetching, and trade. Pictures flatter leisure, lists flatter work. You let your breath match the river's slower thought, until keys, cloth, belt, and bone are held in the same calm. A boy tries to skim a shard of pot and makes 3 hops that feel like luck speaking. Your iron answers with one small click that sounds like approval. Far off, a barge sniffs at the current, and decides, and you admire the modesty of boats that move without demanding applause. The ring, warmed by sun and idleness, smells faintly of rope and the morning's vinegar. You consider unwrapping it to let iron see itself in the water. Then remember that metal and river are friends only until they meet. You keep cloth between them and call the caution wisdom. When you turn away, the reflection leaves at once. The weight at your hip remains, as if it had always been there, which it has, which it will be, until bed persuades you both to forget each other for an hour. Back home, you hang the ring by the hearth to dry its thoughts. Heat draws a faint red dust from the bow and shank rust waking, then loosening its grip as you wipe it away with a respectful rag. In houses like yours, iron is kept near fire, not for shine, but for temper. That is the respectable fact. A quirk that feels like witchcraft and is only patience. Rub a breath of oil into the bow while the metal is warm, then wipe it nearly dry. The key will remember kindness without becoming greasy. Historians still argue whether common households kept a pot of oil to hand for tools and hinges, or relied on kitchen fats and wit. Recipes survive. Habits are shy. You sit on the stool and make little circles with the rag, teaching each tooth to give up its red. The cloth grows fox-colored and pleased with itself. You speak to the iron as you work praise for good behavior, threats of sand if it backslides. The ring says nothing and improves. You lay the bundle of cloth and metal on the warm brick so the last damp will become a curl of steam and a smell like honest work. The hearth breathes evenly. You could do the same for every hinge in the house, and perhaps you will when evening makes a longer seat of the stool. For now, the keys are less red, more themselves, and your hands are patterned with the day's map of small submittings. The hearth, thanked, agrees to keep their memory until morning. You try tallow on the bows again, just enough to promise shine, not enough to make fingerprints into policy. The smell is kitchen honest, a soft animal whisper that never quite leaves iron alone. In ordinary households, tallow is the universal persuader. Rushlight fuel, hinge kindness, thread tamer. That is the respectable fact. A quirk the old ants swore by. Rub the least ash over fresh tallow so it goes modest, not proud. You oblige. The gray bloom takes the edge off shine and saves your apron from becoming a sermon. Historians still argue whether such small housekeeping tricks traveled more by mothers' tongues or chapbooks' pages in this century. The books survive. The tongues did the real work. You polish the square-bowed offender until it learns humility, then turn the meek thin key to give it a little vanity and fairness. The wrapped bundle now smells less of rain and more of supper. You test them against the house. A hinge becomes less opinionated. A chest latch stops sulking. A door remembers how to close without complaint. None of these required your keys, only your hands. Your ring enjoys the flattery anyway, and makes a friendly thud when you move. You wipe each piece once more, then hold the cloth to the light, and declare it retired to the rank of rag that can brag. Iron looks keyeder. Your hip agrees. You hang the bundle on its nail, and let warmth finish what kindness began. When the night bell begins, you count without counting. The sound spills over roofs and asks fire to be thoughtful. You slide a scrap of cloth under the ring where leather meets buckle, then retie the watchman's knot between the loudest two keys. In towns like yours, curfew is both warning and comfort banked the blaze. Bar the bar. Let the lanes belong to feet that mean to be seen. That is the respectable fact. A quirk you keep out of habit. Touch wood at the last stroke. Not for theology, but for temper. Historians still argue whether curfew truly darkened most streets, or whether shutters and custom made more light than edicts allowed. Papers advise. People improvise. You bank embers under ash, a small hill that keeps heat like a good secret. The room lowers its voice, and the keys lower theirs, thudding like a cat's careful step. Outside, someone rattles a latch to see if it will remember its job. It does. You set the ring on the nail by the bed for a while, and listen to the house find its night rhythm drip, tick, settle. Your hip unlearns the bruise one breath at a time. The bell fades to memory. Even the iron agrees to sleep. You remember how the keys became yours, and the story refuses to be important. An uncle with a storeroom changed lodgings and left the ring because the lock stayed. Then the storeroom changed again, and a cousin forgot to fetch the iron that no longer answered. You took the ring because it felt wrong to leave metal that had learned your name. In families and streets, objects keep their own kinship. That is the respectable fact. A quirk follows. Once you carry a thing long enough, people assign it to you the way they assign a mole or a laugh without asking. Historians still argue whether heirlooms in modest houses traveled chiefly by will, gift, or accident. Papers record silver, poor memory records tools. The ring has your uncle's thumb shine in one place, your own in another, and a scratch that belongs to no one who remembers. You turn it in your hand and admit that uselessness has a weight of its own. Not heavy, not light, just the measure of a story that decided to stay. You set it back on the nail and let the house agree. Later, walking a narrow lane, you listen to the delicate music your iron makes and realize the street judges by sound before sight. The ring announces you as someone accompanied, which is to say, someone accounted for. In towns where houses lean close, footsteps and small metal declare more truth than words. That is the respectable fact. A quirk you have noticed. People adjust their own noise to yours, cat's paws. Shutters wait. A gossip lowers her voice a thread in the loom of talk. Historians still argue whether night-walking officers preferred heavy clink or padded stealth in this century. Orders praise silence. Witnesses remember halberds. You let the thud of your wrapped keys set a humane pace, neither sneaking nor boasting. Passing a window, you hear a mother hush a child, and the hush includes you as if you were weather. You are not important. You are predictable. The lane returns the favor by being exactly itself from wall to gutter. Your iron, pleased to have been understood, keeps time like a heart that has made peace with its work. At home again, a posset waits warm milk, ale, a shaving of nutmeg saved for good behavior. Steam softens the last smell of iron on your hands. In many English kitchens, possets and coddles are the medicine of common sense. Heat, sweetness, spice that remembers distant ships. That is the respectable fact. A quirk. Some scrape a whisper of bread into the cup and call it a bed for the drink, so it doesn't feel alone. You try the old joke and decide it keeps company as claimed. Historians still argue whether nutmeg and like comforts graced middling houses often or only on bright days. Account books no sums, tongues no longing. You cradle the ring through cloth while you sip, letting warmth travel from cup to palm to iron. The thud at your hip becomes a companionable weight again. You think you could forgive the whole bundle for everything it did not open if it promises to be this quiet once more. It does not promise. You drink anyway. Bed asks where to hide the iron. You try the pillow, too honest. The stool, too obvious. The chest, too proud. In modest houses, a peg nail by the bed wins high enough for safety, plain enough for sleep. That is the respectable fact. A quirk you keep for yourself. Hang the keys so the bows face the wall and the teeth face the room, so dreams know they are being watched. Historians still argue whether people feared thieves more than spirits at night, or simply arranged their fears in turn. Sermons prefer one answer, charms another. You lift the ring to its peg and feel the belt sigh with relief. The room becomes its truer size without the weight. Linen cools, wool yields, ash settles. When you lie down, your side learns how not to be bitten. Sleep arrives in a plain shirt and sits on the chest until you agree. At first light, you think of returning the ring to someone undefined porter, clerk, locksmith. Chance but morning sensibly refuses theatrics. In towns like yours, responsibility often grows from carrying a thing until no one asks why. That is the respectable fact. A quirk of your own making. You rehearse the speech you will never give. This belongs nowhere in particular, and it sounds like a riddle that would make the day late for work. Historians still argue whether visible keys on belts were emblem more than implement in some streets. Prints love symbols, ledgers love lists. You tie the thong again, and the iron settles where it always settles. Neither oath nor burden, only habit with a voice. The decision not to decide is a frank relief. Outside, the lane is the same color it was yesterday, when you chose otherwise. You go on with the plan you actually keep. Be decent. Step steadily. Let metal tell the time. Acceptance is not a door. It is a rhythm. You let the ring set its soft thud for heel, softer for toe until steps and iron and errands are one sentence. In a small life, companionship can be a noise. That is the respectable fact. A quirk. You now notice other people's little parades, a cooper's hoops telling on him, a seamstress's pins gossiping in her cuff, a clerk's quill scratching in his pocket. The town is a choir of burdens. Historians still argue whether we mistake emblem for authority. Did keys make stewards? Or did stewards make keys look like sense? The record is cheerful and unhelpful. You walk anyway. The ring you cannot justify keeps you company you do not regret. When doors open today, they will do it for other reasons. Hands, custom, kindness. Your iron will merely attend, making it small syllables of solidarity. That is not nothing. It is enough. The day draws its shutters, and you let your thoughts move at the pace of ash cooling. The room is a patient creature again, table remembering elbows, chair remembering your weight, hearth remembering to breathe without flame. On the nail, the ring hangs like a small moon that has decided not to rise, a quiet circle that keeps its gossip to itself. You do not ask it for usefulness. You ask it for stillness, and it gives more than it owes. Breathe in the common sense that makes sleep loyal, wool that has kept you honest, lime that has kept the wall from wandering, the clean, faint ghost of vinegar on cloth, a whisper of tallow that promises light tomorrow. Let the sounds reduce to the grammar of rest, settle, sigh, far water under talk. The old board that answers the night once, and then remembers its manners. Nothing presses from outside the door. Nothing presses from within. You lie on your side that is not bruised, and the bed finds your shape without argument. The house takes your weight and adds it to the summit means to keep till morning. Think of the lanes as they will be before dawn's stone learning to be cool again. Gutters rehearsing a thin song, a distant bell clearing its throat. The city will borrow you when it is ready. For now it has put you back on the shelf. If a worry knocks, let it be a hinge, not a visitor. Oil it with one slow breath and close it gently. If a plan arrives, give it a seat by the fire that isn't lit and tell it the kettle will know when. Dream, if you like, of locks that open to kindness and of keys that open to sleep. The ring will keep its place on the nail. You will keep yours in the bed. Both will be waiting in the morning, exactly as promised. We hope this quiet step into another time has left you feeling rested. If you've enjoyed it, you're welcome to like, share, or leave a gentle note. And if you'd like more slow walks through history, you can subscribe and join us again. End of script. Sweet dreams.